Welcome to today's 5-minute Bible study in the book of Deuteronomy. Today we're in Deuteronomy chapter 12, and we're looking at verses 2 and 3. Now, you remember in yesterday's session we saw that chapter 12 was Moses telling the Israelites, when you possess the promised land, you are to set up one central place for worship. You're not just a worshiping place you choose. All over the place, you're to have one central place of worship. You set the tabernacle in one place, and there you are to come and offer your sacrifices and offerings and your worship to the Lord. You are not to worship as the Canaanites do. They worship on the high places, and you are to destroy those places of worship. And that's what it talks about in verses 2 and 3 of chapter 12. That's what it says. Destroy completely all the places on the high mountains, on the hills, and under every spreading tree, where the nations you are dispossessing worship their gods. Break down their altars, smash their sacred stones, burn their Asherah poles in the fire, cut down the idols of their gods, wipe out their name from those places. Now, the emphasis on the high places is because that's where the Canaanite peoples worshipped, on hilltops and on mountains, on elevated space. The high places were considered sacred spaces. They were usually under trees, considered sacred trees, and they would build their altars. Altars to Baal, altars to the Asherah, which was mentioned in this passage. And so Moses tells the Israelites, you're not to worship at their high places. As a matter of fact, you are to desecrate those high places. You are to tear down their altars and tear down their sacred poles that they worship at. You will not worship on the high places, because those are places of idolatry. And when it says you're to wipe out their names from those places, that's the names of their gods, the names of Baal and of Asherah, those pagan idols they worship. Do away with even the memory of those idols from the places. The high places were places of idolatry, places of Canaanite worship. You are not to worship there. Now, when you read the history of Israel, you're going to see this was a constant temptation to them. They did not really follow the commands of Moses and wipe out the high places. And as they lived in the land, they were tempted to worship there. Now, part of what would happen, they would go to the high places and they would worship God there alongside of Baal. And over a period of time, they were worshiping both Baal and God. And they kind of blended the two together. This was the temptation. Now, all through the history of Israel, as you read through the books of Samuel and Kings and Chronicles, a lot of times you'll see kings are judged on whether or not they destroyed the high places or whether they left the high places. Because these high places were places of idolatrous worship, where the Canaanite gods were worshipped. And if they left them, they would be a constant, and were a constant, snare to the Israelites. But Moses had made it very clear to them, destroy these places of idolatry. Worship only the Lord your God. Worship him only at his tabernacle, so you not be tempted to follow after these pagan gods, these idols of the Canaanites. Destroy the high places. Now, there's less for us here. There are a lot of high places in our culture, in our society. Places where people worship something or someone other than God. A high place represents any place of idolatry. So the high places in our society are not necessarily where people are setting up idols and images of pagan gods, but they're things and objects and objectives and causes and other people that society worships rather than God. Those are our society's high places. We must have nothing to do with those high places. We must not compromise our faith by worshiping things other than God. We must be devoted only to the Lord. And so the command to us is still clear. Tear down the high places in your life. Anything that tempts you to worship anyone or anything other than God, that's a high place. And you must do away with it, so you will be devoted only to the Lord your God through faith in Jesus Christ. So Moses made it clear to the Israelites, when you go into the land, tear down the high places. Don't succumb to idolatry. Worship only the Lord your God. Join us tomorrow. We'll continue in our 5-minute Bible study in the book of Deuteronomy.